On Christmas Eve, 1945, in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a house burned to the ground. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, a terrible fire in the middle of the night. 5 children were believed to be trapped inside. But when the flames finally died down, investigators made a discovery that would turn a tragedy into a mystery. There were no bodies, not a single bone. No trace of the 5 children who were supposedly inside the house when it burned. For a while, authorities insisted there was a simple explanation. The fire had simply destroyed everything. But over time, that explanation began to feel less convincing. Because when you start examining what happened that night, the story becomes far more complicated. There were strange phone calls, missing equipment, vehicles that suddenly wouldn't start, witnesses who claimed to see the children alive after the fire. And years later, a photograph appeared that seemed to suggest one of the missing children had survived. It's the kind of story that, at first, sounds almost impossible. But the deeper you look into the Sodder children mystery, the harder it becomes to accept the official version of events. But before we get into what really happened that night, if you enjoy mysterious historical events like this one, and you are finding this video interesting, please consider leaving a like. It really helps support the channel. And if you subscribe, it genuinely means a lot to us. Now, to understand how this mystery began, we have to go back to the Sodder family. The Sodder family were well known in Fayetteville. George Sodder had immigrated to the United States from Italy as a teenager and eventually built a successful trucking business. By the mid-1940s, George and his wife Jenny were raising 10 children together. Their home sat on a hillside overlooking the small Appalachian town. Neighbors remembered them as a lively household. There was always activity, children playing outside, trucks coming and going from George's business. It was the kind of place where life felt stable, predictable. On Christmas Eve of 1945, the Sodder house was full of excitement. The younger children had been allowed to stay up later than usual to play with their new toys. There was laughter, music, the kind of noise that fills a home during the holidays. Eventually, as midnight approached, George and Jenny told the younger children it was time for bed. Some of them went upstairs. Others stayed downstairs a little longer. Looking back now, it was the last normal moment the family would ever have together, because within a few hours, everything would change. At around 12:30 in the morning, Jenny Sodder was awakened by the sound of the telephone ringing downstairs. She went to answer it. On the other end of the line was a woman asking for someone Jenny didn't recognize. In the background, Jenny could hear laughter and voices. The caller sounded confused, almost as if she had dialed the wrong number. Jenny told her she must have the wrong house, and the woman apologized before hanging up. At the time, it seemed like nothing more than a minor interruption, but later investigators would question whether that call had been something else entirely. Jenny returned to bed. For about 30 minutes, the house was quiet again. Then she woke up a second time. This time, it wasn't the phone. It was the smell of smoke. When Jenny stepped into the hallway, she saw flames spreading along the roof. Within minutes, the fire began moving through the upper floor. She immediately woke George. Together, they rushed outside, shouting for the children. Several of them managed to escape, but 5 were still inside the house. Maurice, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty. George desperately tried to reach them. His first instinct was to grab the ladder he kept outside the house so he could climb to the second-floor windows. But when he ran to the side of the house, the ladder wasn't there. It had vanished. At first, he thought he must have moved it somewhere else, but it wasn't anywhere nearby, and the fire was spreading fast. George then tried another plan. His trucks were parked just outside. If he could drive one up close to the house, he might be able to climb onto the roof. But when he tried to start the first truck, the engine wouldn't turn over, which was strange because the vehicle had worked perfectly the day before. So he tried the second truck. It didn't start either. Both trucks had suddenly stopped working at the worst possible moment. Meanwhile, the flames were consuming the upper floor. George could hear the children screaming inside. He tried throwing objects at the windows. He tried climbing the walls, but there was nothing he could do. Within minutes, the entire house was engulfed in flames. Neighbors saw the fire and rushed to help. Someone called the local fire department. But Fayetteville was a small town, and the fire department was not equipped to respond quickly. By the time firefighters arrived, the house had already collapsed into burning rubble. The official explanation seemed simple. 5 children had died in the fire. But when investigators began searching through the ruins, they expected to find remains, bones, fragments, something. But they didn't. Not a single trace of the children was discovered. The official report suggested the fire had been so intense that it completely cremated the bodies. But experts later pointed out something important. House fires usually do not burn hot enough to completely destroy human bones. Even in professional cremation chambers, bone fragments normally remain. But in the Sodder house, there was nothing. And that raised a disturbing possibility. What if the children had never been in the house when it burned? In the days that followed, witnesses began reporting strange sightings. One woman claimed she saw the children looking out the window of a passing car on the night of the fire. Another said she had seen them the following morning at a roadside diner. According to her, the children were accompanied by 2 unfamiliar adults. At first, these reports were dismissed, but the Sodder family refused to ignore them. George and Jenny believed their children were still alive, and they spent the rest of their lives trying to prove it. The investigation uncovered several unsettling details. Months before the fire, George Sodder had openly criticized the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. According to George, a man became extremely angry during one of these arguments and warned him that his house would burn and his children would pay the price. At the time, George brushed the threat aside. But after the fire, that warning suddenly seemed much more serious. Then there was the ladder. A few days after the fire, the missing ladder was discovered in a ditch some distance from the house. Someone had moved it, but no one ever explained who or why. And then there were the trucks. Mechanics later discovered that their ignition systems had been tampered with. The trucks hadn't simply failed, someone had disabled them. Years passed, but the Sodder family never stopped searching. They even built a large billboard along a nearby highway, displaying photographs of the missing children and offering a reward for information. For decades, drivers passing through West Virginia saw those 5 faces staring back at them, frozen in time, waiting for answers. Then in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, a mysterious envelope arrived. Inside was a photograph of a young man. On the back was a handwritten message. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Elil boys, a 90132 or 35. Louis had been 9 years old when the fire occurred, but the man in the photograph looked remarkably similar to him, just older. The Sodder family was stunned. For a moment, it seemed possible the mystery might finally be solved. But despite hiring a private investigator, no one was ever able to track down the sender. And the man in the photograph was never identified. Over the years, many theories have tried to explain the mystery. Some believe the children truly died in the fire. Others believe they were kidnapped, possibly as retaliation connected to George Sodder's outspoken political opinions. Another theory suggests the fire itself may have been deliberately set as a distraction, allowing someone to remove the children during the chaos. It sounds unbelievable, but when you consider the missing ladder, the sabotaged trucks, the witness sightings, and the mysterious photograph, the story becomes much harder to dismiss. George and Jenny Sodder spent the rest of their lives searching for answers. They never stopped believing their children were alive somewhere. Because in their minds, the evidence simply didn't support a tragic accident. It pointed to something else, something that had never been fully explained. Today, the Sodder house is long gone, but the questions remain. 5 children disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1945, and nearly 80 years later, no one has ever been able to say for certain what happened to them. Did they die in that fire? Or did they disappear into the darkness of that winter night, leaving behind one of the strangest mysteries in American history? Because sometimes the most disturbing mysteries are not the ones where we have no evidence. They're the ones where the evidence suggests something impossible, and the truth was never meant to be found.